Mr. Riley. Oh, brother. Oh, buddy. So we are at Eliza Brook Shelter now. Riley, hold up. All right, so this is Eliza Brook Shelter. Today is Monday, September the 9th. And it is day number, if it's Monday, September 9th, then that means we have 15 plus 21, 36 days left. So it means it's day number 130. Go ahead, Riley, go ahead. Yeah, so I'm a little confused on the days because we took a 0 yesterday on Sunday. The last video that I did was on Saturday. It was as I was approaching the shelter, and I was talking about, I think I showed the signs for the forest protection area, and was talking about the rules for camping, and I have had quite an adventure since then, and I have a lot to say. I'm very thankful that Riley and I are okay. We are just starting the day. It's kind of late, but I'm finally ready to get moving here. So I have a lot to say, but I'm not going to say it now. I'll do some footage as we go up this mountain, and then once we get up and over the mountain safely, I think I'll be ready to talk more and explain what's happened the past couple days since Saturday night. This is Eliza Brook to our left. We just crossed Eliza Brook back there. Some kind of lake is out there. There's some name to it. I'm not sure what it is, but it's in my guidebook. I'll check it later. It's very marshy here, so they have these planks for us to walk over. We got a big rock scramble ahead of us. Whoops. So we're getting ready to start this big, crazy rock scramble. Hold up, buddy. And there's this little flat piece of land right here. Very tiny. This is where I tried to set my tent up on Saturday night, and it turned out to be too small. Too small, so I gave up on it. Making progress. Okay. What's up, buddy? You're doing awesome, buddy. Doing awesome. Nice weather today. Okay. All right, I believe this is South Kinsman Peak here. That's a cairn to help guide the way of where the trail goes. And this is as far as Riley and I made it on Saturday night. And I know I haven't explained everything yet. I'll explain it at some point, but this is as far as we made it, and it was dark and foggy, and I could not see. I was looking for the next cairn to guide where we needed to go, and I couldn't find it. And I think I got around over here, and I mean I could see the plants, but I did not see that the trail went this way. And I think at that point I went back to the cairn and tried to follow where the trail went, and I ended up going back that way, thinking that that was the way that we needed to continue, and I was just disoriented. But apparently we just needed to continue this way. Much easier in the daylight, so much easier. So I think we have about a mile on top of this mountain until we get to North Kinsman Peak, and then we'll begin the descent on the other side. Here's another cairn. Hold up, buddy. Stop for a second and check out the view. So there's a white blaze to indicate that the trail continues that way. So I think this is North Kinsman Peak here. Right, hold up, buddy. Yes, it looks like there is a lookout point over there, which we are not going to go to. Plenty of views from this vantage point here. All right. I started the day with my puffy on, but I was getting hot, so I took it off, and I'm hiking with no shirt on right now. Mr. Riley. We just saw a lady and a dog, and they're a little bit ahead of us right now. All right, so we have made it to the first hut in the White Mountains. This is Lonesome Lake Hut. That's the entrance to the kitchen and dining room. Very nice. The people that are staying at the hut are about to have dinner pretty soon, I assume. And Riley and I gotta get on the move here because the light is going away. So we just gotta continue this way. All right. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Riley and I are safe and sound in our tent now. Normally I would say I want to close out the day, which I'm going to do, but I also need to give an update on what's been going on since Saturday and why we took a zero yesterday. So on Saturday night, anyway, so let me just say what we did today. So we hiked up and over what's people refer to as the Kinsmans. So there's a South Kinsman Peak and North Kinsman Peak. We hiked over that. Then we descended, got to the side trail to the next shelter, which is called Kinsman Pond Shelter, partway down the mountain. And then we continued to descend. And actually, by the time we got to that shelter, Kinsman Pond Shelter, clouds had moved in, and the sky was cloudy, and it seemed like it was getting kind of late, actually. It seemed like the light was starting to recede, and I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I was hoping to get to a campsite tonight called Liberty Springs Campsite, and we're about 3.1 miles south of that right now. Anyway, so after we passed that side trail to Kinsman Pond Shelter, we had done 4 miles on the day so far from our starting point at Eliza Brook Shelter. And then we continued to descend, and in another 2 miles we got to Lonesome Lake Hut, which is the first hut that is reached northbound. So the huts are unique to the White Mountains, in that they're not shelters, but they're like vacation spots, basically, where people that want to kind of take a vacation in the White Mountains can reserve a room at one of these huts, and they need to find a parking spot or get dropped off and then hike up to the hut, and then they can reserve a bunk, or maybe there's probably private rooms as well, and there's a small staff on hand to make sure the place stays clean and prepare meals. That's one of the nice benefits of staying in the hut, is there's a really nice dinner that's prepared for all the guests, and then a nice breakfast as well. And hikers, AT hikers, can ask to stay there in exchange for doing some work. It's called work for stay. But they only allow like 2 to sometimes as many as 4, from my experience on my previous hike, like 2 to 4 hikers per hut per night. And so that's an option for some hikers, but it's not an option for Riley and I because they don't allow dogs, and so that's Riley happens to be a dog, so it's not really an option for us to stay at the huts. So we got to Lonesome Lake Hut, and then we continued to hike and got a few miles past it, and we're basically at we got to this water source called Whitehouse Brook, and I saw a reasonably flat spot near the side of the trail, and we're not in a forest protection area right now, so my assumption is that camping is legal here. And I found a reasonably flat, there's not many camp spots to be found, and this is not a designated camp spot, but it's reasonably flat, and I was able to get our tent set up, so I'm very pleased that we're in our tent and we have shelter for the night, and we have plenty of water from the water source, so that's all good. So, and we hiked a total of 8.3 miles today, from the starting point of Eliza Brook Shelter. Anyway, so I'll try not to make this too long, but on Saturday night, so this was 2 days ago, I was approaching Eliza Brook Shelter, and we had started the day at Beaver Brook Shelter, and from Beaver Brook to Eliza Brook Shelter is 9 miles, and we got to the side trail leading to Eliza Brook Shelter while it was still light out, but it was clear that we didn't have much time left before it was going to get dark. And I was kind of greedy. I was definitely greedy because I just felt like 9 miles was too short of a day. And I thought, I knew the next shelter was Kinsman Pond Shelter, which is 4 miles ahead. And I figured that would be too far to get in the time that we had. And I didn't want to night hike all the way to that shelter. I knew that there was a steep climb up to the Kinsmans, South Kinsman Peak and North Kinsman Peak. And I knew that part way up there was a pond. Let me check the name of this pond. I showed it earlier today on camera. The pond is called Harrington Pond. And it's really not much of a pond. It's more like from what I saw today, it's more like a marsh area. And there's some flat spots. There's some flat ground surrounding it. And they have planks to walk on the AT next to it because the AT portion is kind of submerged. There's just water on the ground, so they have planks to help you walk over it. And so I was actually thinking that, not from any really reliable source, just from my memory, in my 2018 hike, I remembered this pond, and I remembered that it seemed like there was some flat ground near there, and I had in my mind that we could hike another 1.4 miles after this shelter and try to camp there for the night and just increase our mileage a little bit up to 10.4 for the day. I mean, either way, it's 9 or 10.4, like, big deal. It's not a big deal. It's not a big difference, but I wanted to get a little further. That's what was going through my head. And we ended up having an absolutely terrible night, absolutely terrible, as a result of my poor decision. Very ill-advised, there was a logic to my decision, but it turned out to be awful. So after we passed the shelter, Eliza Brook Shelter, first of all, it was chilly at this point. It wasn't freezing, but it was chilly. And there were clouds. The sky was all clouded over. But at the same time, it was very, the air was very still. The whole day, the air had been very still. And I remember talking about how I just had an uneasy feeling, and that I was strongly considering just stopping at Eliza Brook Shelter, and that's what I should have done, in retrospect. No question about it. I should have stopped there. But because the air was so still, I thought that there was a low chance that it was going to start raining, because in my experience, it usually, before it starts raining, like, the wind usually picks up and you can usually see the leaves blowing in a particular direction. And that's an indication that a storm is coming. But it was completely quiet. And so I used that to convince myself that the rain wasn't really a threat. So we passed by the side trail to the shelter, and we got probably a half mile, or maybe a little less than that, but we got like a good ways past the shelter, enough where I wouldn't want to turn back and go back to the shelter unless we had to. And it started sprinkling. And I was continuing to hike. I figured it was all right that it was sprinkling, because we don't have too far to go, and hopefully we'll be able to set up our tent, and get in our tent, and have a good night. Anyway, so the 1.4 miles leading up to this Harrington Pond place was not particularly easy hiking. It was a good bit uphill and pretty rocky, and the rain just kind of continued to increase. So like it wasn't like pouring rain, but it advanced from a sprinkle to just rain. So and it was very cold water. Like the rain combined with the chilly temperatures to just be very cold. And so I had my rain jacket on, and I had Riley's rain jacket on. But I was still getting wet. My rain jacket was wetting through, and yeah, so I was still getting wet. And initially, when it started raining and it was getting dark, I started to try to look for campsites, and I saw like a spot kind of far into the woods that I thought might work. And so I decided to kind of walk into the woods a little bit and get a closer look. And when I did that, there was some branch that caught my pants as I was walking, and it tore a hole in my pants. It's in like the bottom part of my pants, and I was really bummed out about that when it happened, because I just got brand new pants from when I saw my dad like 3 days ago on Friday, and part of the reason I needed new pants was I had holes in my previous pants, and now I just got a huge rip in my brand new pants. On the positive side, the rip is on the lower part of the leg, and the upper part of the pants are still in good shape. So that's that. Anyway, I was really upset when that happened, but that turned out to be the least of our troubles. So we continued to hike, and we eventually got to this place where the pond was, and we were walking over all these planks, and by that point it was just dark, and I had my headlamp out, but it was also foggy, and the visibility was just very poor, and I couldn't even see the pond. Like, I just saw the brush on either side of us, and the plants on either side of us, and the planks in front of us, and I didn't see, like today when I was walking through there in the sunshine, I did see the marsh area, and I walked out a little bit, and I did see some flat ground where potentially we could have set up, although it wouldn't have been ideal. But when we were hiking through there on Saturday, I just didn't see any place where we could camp. And I wasn't even sure that we were at the pond. I thought maybe it's a little further ahead. So we continued to hike. We had already hiked like over a mile, and I didn't feel like walking a mile back to the shelter. So we continued to hike. And at this point, it's continuing to rain, and we're continuing to get cold. And then after we passed the pond, we had a lot of uphill to go, and a lot more uphill. We'd been doing uphill, and it was quite rocky, and then it continued to get even more rocky, and there were just big rock slabs where we had to climb over with our hands, using our hands. Very challenging hiking, made especially more challenging because it was dark, and it was raining, and it was cold. So that's like 4 things that are bad: dark, wet, cold, and very challenging hiking. So that made for an awful, awful situation. And at that point, I was like, all right, we just need to, I've made an awful decision at this point. But at this point, we just need to try to get to that next shelter, which I knew was 4 miles from the previous shelter. So my target was to get to Kinsman Pond Shelter. And we eventually made it up all the way to South Kinsman Peak, which I took a video of earlier today, and we saw that cairn. And when we got up there, the fog seemed even more intense up there than it was when we were hiking up the mountain. And I had awful visibility because it was dark. And my headlamp was just reflecting off the fog and wasn't really helping very much. And I knew that when there's cairns, there's usually another cairn that you need to look for to help guide where to go. And I couldn't see another cairn, and I couldn't see where the trail went either. So I kind of walked back to the first cairn that I saw, and then I tried to just follow the ground to see which direction, to see if I could make out where the trail went. And I felt like I was able to follow it reasonably well. And so I just followed the direction that I thought the trail went. And then shortly after that, we started going downhill. And so as it turns out, long story short, we
So when I got to that, when I went back to the cairn and tried to find where the trail went, I started hiking southbound by accident, and I didn't realize it. I thought I had been able to find the trail that led northbound, but in reality I was walking southbound at that point. And so we ended up just retracing our steps back down this mountain, all this challenging hiking, and at this point I was thinking we were headed towards Kinsman Pond Shelter, but regardless, we were so cold and wet, and I was just of the mindset, we have to get to the shelter, we have to keep moving. If we did not keep moving, if we took a break, then we would get even more cold. The only thing that was keeping us warm was the fact that we were moving, and it was a very dangerous situation. We had to get to the shelter. If we did not get to the shelter, then I'm pretty sure we would have gotten hypothermia and not had a good result. I forgot to mention, as we were hiking up, there was a flat spot after we had gotten to the pond area on our right, and I took a picture of it, a video of it, earlier today. There was a reasonably flat spot, and initially when we passed by there on Saturday, I thought I might be able to set up our tent there, and so I stopped and I secured Riley, and it was raining during this whole time, so I stopped and secured Riley, took my pack off, got my tent out, took things out of my pack, and laid my ground sheet down and laid my tent down, and then got my stakes out. And at that point I realized there's no way I'm going to be successful with setting up my tent, because there's just not enough space here. And that was very, very disappointing. For one thing, we were just continuing to get more wet and more cold, but also, and for another, we weren't able to. I was hoping we would be able to stop there, but we weren't able to stop there. And it took me a while to accept the fact that I just had to put everything back into my pack and keep moving. So on top of that, as a result of trying to set my tent up there, like, everything in my pack got even more wet, and my tent got wet, but I eventually got everything back in my pack, and then we continued on. Anyway, so we eventually made it back to, we eventually basically retraced our entire steps, and we got back to Eliza Brook Shelter. And it wasn't until I got to the shelter, when I got to the shelter sign, before I had a chance to read it, I was excited that we had gotten to a shelter. And regardless, I was happy at that point, just to be at a shelter. So, but it wasn't until I actually read the sign and it said Eliza Brook Shelter that I fully realized that we had gone in the wrong direction, and just retraced everything that we had done before. I did realize that things were starting to seem very reminiscent. When we, the first 0.8 of a mile after leaving the shelter going northbound, the Eliza Brook was on our left, and it's a very large, loud brook. And then as we were coming back, I noticed that this large, loud brook was on our right, and I was like, well, that seems very similar. And I was starting to get concerned that we were going in the wrong direction, and that we had gotten ourselves turned around at some point. but then I felt more comfortable that we hadn't, and it was just a coincidence, because I was like, well, if we had gotten turned around at some point, then I would have seen that cairn again. Like, I definitely would have remembered seeing that cairn a second time. And I was like, well, we never passed by that cairn a second time, so we must be still going in the right direction. But now, in retrospect, I realize that the reason we didn't see that cairn that second time is it must be that was the point where we just got turned around by accident. So we were basically hiking for our lives. We had to keep moving, and we had to get to a shelter. Even if there wasn't any good tent site to be had, but even if there was, we would have been extremely cold, I think, just having to set up the tent, and, in the rain and getting more rained on. Extremely cold, and it would have been very, very hard to get warm. And so I figured getting to the shelter was definitely the best option, where we could be sure that it would be dry inside the shelter. Anyway, so we eventually got back to the shelter after hiking for our lives. I was telling Riley, I was apologizing to him. He was doing awesome this whole time. There were times where he didn't feel like he could get up some of the rocks, and I had to pull him pull on the leash to help him. But whenever he was able to jump himself, he jumped, and he was moving. He did great. And so we were put in a bad situation because of my poor decision, but I feel like we both, human beings don't want to die, so we had no choice but to keep hiking and get to the shelter. So we ended up hiking it 5 miles through extremely challenging terrain, in the dark, in cold, wet weather. Just the worst combination possible. And we somehow made it back to the shelter where we needed to get to. And when we got there, we were super cold, and I knew it. And the only thing that kept us warm was that we were moving the whole time. And we weren't even warm. We were still freezing, but at least we were warm enough that we were able to stay alive during that time. I know, this is absolutely awful. So we got to the shelter. There were 3 people in the shelter. 2 people on the right side, and 1 person on the left side, and she was in the far corner to stay as far away from the rain as possible. And Riley and I got there, and the person on the left side in the far corner woke up. I think everybody woke up, but she was the only one that really talked to us, and she seemed very concerned for our well-being, and she offered to move all of her stuff. She had some stuff that was taking up space, and she offered to move it out of the way to make room for us. And it was so nice to see her, I was just absolutely desperate to get to a shelter, and we finally got there, and then she made us feel so welcome, and I'm really thankful for that. Riley, when he was able to get in the shelter and I was getting my stuff set up, Riley kind of walked over to her and curled up next to her, and rested kind of on her sleeping area, and she was totally fine with that. She didn't complain at all. She just let him do what he needed to do, to try to get warm, and I was so appreciative that she was so kind and allowed him to do that. And so I was eventually, like, when I got to the shelter, I just stripped off all of my wet clothes and took my got our pads set up and then got our dry bag out and got my sleeping bag out and my liner out and my pillow, and got my blue compression leggings and got those on after I got my hiking pants off and my underwear off. So I'm very thankful I had those leggings to put on. But I didn't have any dry shirts. My hiking shirt was soaked, my rain jacket was soaked, and then my other hiking shirt was not in my dry bag. It was in my pack, I think, for whatever reason. So that got soaked. But fortunately, my puffy jacket was in my dry bag, and so that was still dry. And so I was able to put that on to keep warm. And I just kind of, we just need to get our wet stuff off as quickly as possible and get into our sleeping stuff and as quickly as possible. And I just didn't really care that much about organizing my other things, so I just left my pack in the shelter, and all the bags that I opened, I don't remember exactly what I did with them, but they were just out of the way, but next to our pads. And Riley was shivering, understandably, and I was in my liner and my sleeping bag, and Riley still had his jacket on, and his jacket was wet. And so, and I remember the other lady who Riley was kind of cuddling with was asking if it made sense to take his jacket off and if he would be warmer with it off. And I decided to keep it on. I figured it would dry out, and it was better to keep it on than to just take it off. I'm not sure if that's... It just seemed so cold that I felt keeping the jacket on was a better decision. And usually it's the case that the jacket is still somewhat dry on the inside. Anyway, I decided to keep the jacket on, and when I realized he was shivering, I decided to take my puffy jacket off and put that over him as a blanket. And so I was in my sleeping bag with just nothing on my upper body, but just in my liner and my sleeping bag. So at least we were dry at that point, and we were out of the rain. We were cold, but we were warm enough to survive the night. And it was not comfortable, but we were warm enough to survive the night. And then the next morning came, and everybody in the shelter kind of hiked out. I was able to talk to this lady, and I found out her name was either hiking mama or hiker mama. But I made sure to talk to her before she left, and I thanked her immensely for how kind she was. And I'm really, I really appreciate her kindness in helping us. I mean, she just didn't complain at all, and she made us feel very welcome, and she helped Riley to be as comfortable as he could be. But the next day came, and Riley and I were still cold. We had been cold the whole night, so I was in no mood to, after almost dying, basically, I was in no mood to continue to hike, and I was considering quitting. But I was just in no mood to continue to hike, so I didn't know what my plan was for the day, but I just wanted to stay in the shelter and stay in our sleeping bag and try to get warm. So we ended up spending the whole day there yesterday, and several people came into the shelter area, just passing by. There was one in late morning. There was a guy and a lady who came in, and they said that they were planning to hike up northbound, the direction that we had hiked the previous night. And I told them the story of what happened to us, and the lady was very, very concerned. She also very nice. Her name was Kay, and I told her that I was thinking about quitting the hike, and she was extremely nice, and she said that she lives locally in New Hampshire, and she said that if I do make the decision to end the hike and I need any help, that I can call her. So she said she took my number, and she said she would text me her number, and she said, don't hesitate to call me if you need a ride, because you decide you don't want to continue. You can call me anytime, and I can come pick you up. And she even offered to let us stay at her house while we arrange transportation back if we did decide to quit, to end the hike. And before leaving, she actually gave us she had a chicken salad sandwich on her, and she gave that to me, and she also gave me a bottle of coconut water. So I was very appreciative of that, and I thanked her very much. And she and her partner then left to continue to hike on, but then shortly after that, Kay came back down, and she said that she had decided not to hike up. Something came up, and so she decided not to hike up, but she reiterated that I should call her if I did decide to end the hike, and she would be happy to help me out. So I really appreciate that. Then later on, a little after that, I saw Rome and Firemaster. I haven't seen those two for a good long time, like at least a week. And apparently they were staying at this hostel called the Notch Hostel, and they were apparently they saw Kay, and she mentioned that we were here, and so they decided to come into the shelter for a little bit before they continued to hike on. And so I was able to tell both of them our story, and they listened. And anyway, it was great to see Rome and Firemaster again. Rome was listening to me talk about my decision, and he totally understood my decision to try to get further. Like they didn't say I was stupid or anything for making the decision, even though I said that it was a very stupid decision to not come into the shelter initially. Anyway, but it was good to see them again, and then eventually they left. And Riley and I, at this point, we were doing fine. I was just in no mood to continue to hike at this point, and I just wanted to stay dry and just recoup mentally and figure out what our next steps are. Anyway, so then by the end of the day, the other 3 hikers that I had met the previous days, Jukebox, Bear Bite, and Half Pint, they all showed up. So they had sock packed southbound Mount Musalaki the previous day, and then which was Saturday, the day that Riley and I had this terrible experience on going up going up South Kinsman. And then on Sunday, the next day, they hiked from the Kinsman Notch up to Eliza Brook Shelter, and they got there by the evening. So I was able to talk to them, and it was great to see them again. And Half Pint ended up staying in the shelter that night, and Jukebox and his partner Bear Bite decided to tent. and so, yeah, gradually the day just passed by, and we ended up taking a 0 yesterday, which was Sunday. And it was great to have all the extra rest, and it was great to I was able to get some reading done, a lot of reading done, and I was able to take just nap, and Riley was able to nap, so we got lots of rest. And then the morning came today, and I felt like I was ready to continue on, but I didn't want to continue on super like right away, because I was still cold. I was still cold last night. Like, my shirts did not dry out on Sunday. They dried out to where they weren't soaking, but they were still damp and cold. And so last night I actually wore my puffy jacket, but I took my liner out, and I was just in my sleeping bag, and I used my liner as a blanket for Riley. So fortunately, Riley's jacket was dry, at least dry last night, and I supplemented his warmth with using the liner as a blanket for him. And so last night I was still on the chilly side. So by this morning, whenever I'm on the chilly side overnight, I'm not in the mood to get up early when it's cold out. But I felt like I could continue on today. I mean, regardless, even if I decided to quit, I would still need to hike to get to a road. There wasn't any close road to get to, so I figured we have to hike. I feel like I'm in a better emotional state today compared to yesterday, and but I wasn't looking forward. I was kind of scared to go back up Kinsman, but the sun was out today, and so we had good weather, and so I said, all right, let's try this again, and let's just take it one step at a time. And it was kind of a big accomplishment to get up and over the mountain today, after having so much trouble with it on Saturday. So lessons learned are, you got to respect the White Mountains, the White Mountains are not to be taken lightly, And you really need to prioritize getting from one shelter place to another shelter place without needing to hike in the dark, and recognizing that it can start raining at any time, kind of. Fortunately, I don't think the rain is. After it rained on Saturday, I heard some people saying that the forecast looked really good for the next several days. But the skies clouded over again today, and I was worried that it was going to rain. And fortunately, it didn't rain, but I was worried that it was going to. But yeah, so back to like lessons. It's really just important to prioritize safety above all else. So we got to this Whitehouse Brook area, and I saw this tent site reasonably flat ground on the side of the trail, and I didn't feel like hiking another 3 miles to get to my target, which was Liberty Springs campsite. So I decided it would be good to set up our tent here, and we were able to do that while it was still light out, but the light was going very quickly. So we basically got the tent set up without having to do any night hiking. So that's good, and we're lucky for that. And tomorrow there is a shelter called Garfield Ridge Shelter in 10.8 miles. And so I think that is our best target to try to get to tomorrow. And I think I think Riley and I need to get up early tomorrow so that we can give ourselves as much hiking time during the day to get there before dark. So basically we have about a half mile to get to Franconia Notch, where there's a parking area. And from there we have the rest of the day. It's like a big climb up to, I think it's referred to as Franconia Ridge. There's like 2 miles or 2.5 miles above tree line. So it's a big climb up, and then there's this like 2 miles above tree line, and I think that's referred to as Franconia Ridge. And there's a big mountain in the middle of that called Mount Lafayette, and then a big descent after that. And that's going to be the bulk of the day tomorrow. Once we get down on the other side, there is another kind of steep climb and a steep descent. But the total distance of that is only a little over a mile, maybe. And then on the other side of that, and the elevation change on that second ascent and descent is much smaller than Franconia Ridge. But then on the other side of that second descent is this Garfield Ridge Shelter, which is a total of, it'll be 10.8 miles on the day. So I think that is our goal for tomorrow. Anyway, so that's the full story as to what happened. We almost died on Saturday. We could have died if we hadn't, if we hadn't been able to keep hiking and get back to the shelter. And it was just an absolutely terrible situation. And at this point, I feel like I'm able to continue. I was, just going through this experience, and it made me consider just quitting. But I feel like Riley and I have recovered, and I feel like we're able to continue. That doesn't mean we won't quit in the future. But it's made me reassess the need to be extra cautious as we continue forward and prioritize safety above all else. So, to summarize, or just to kind of close out the day, Riley and I are safe and sound in our tent now. It's not as cold tonight. It doesn't feel as cold as it did last night, which is good, but it's still on the chilly side. So, and also at least one of my shirts was able to dry out today. So I'm going to be able to wear that tonight to get more warmth. And we're going to try to get a good night's sleep and get up early tomorrow and start another hiking day. Just thinking if there's anything else to say. There was another couple, or there was a couple of ladies who we also saw last night at the shelter. They actually got in before Half Pint, Jukebox, and Bear Bite, and they had a dog with them, and they were also very nice. And I chatted with them and told them the story of what happened, and they were super nice. They offered to give me some warm water since they had a stove with them. So they gave me some warm water, which I was able to use for one of my dehydrated meals. And they also, one of the ladies, she lent me a pair of dry socks because she knew that my socks were wet. So she said I could use the socks to keep my feet warm. And then this morning she was like, you can just have the socks. She was happy to give them to me. So that was very nice of her. So now I have an extra pair of socks. So one pair, I wear the liners and then an outer pair of darn toughs to hike in. But now I have an extra pair that I can wear at night. As long as I try to keep it dry, then if my socks get wet during the day, which very likely they will, it's nice to have a dry pair to put on at night. Yeah, so that's very nice. And then another thing is when we were approaching Lonesome Lake Cut tonight, we saw a couple of people on the trail that were staying at the hut. They had walked south on the trail maybe about a quarter mile or so just because they wanted to. And then as we were all hiking back, Riley was kind of looking back. He didn't want to get too far ahead of them. As we got back to the hut, one of the ladies said, she asked me if I was hungry, and I was like, yes, I am hungry. And she had a sandwich that she said she didn't want, and she offered to give it to me. And so she gave it to me, and she gave me an orange as well. And I actually was so hungry that I ate the sandwich as I was hiking. And I gave Riley a few morsels. I'm going to give him more food before we go to bed tonight. But it was an absolutely delicious sandwich. I think it was another chicken salad sandwich, but it had a very nice spiciness and also sweetness to it due to some very nice sauces that were added. It was on a very nice loaves of bread or slices of bread. Absolutely delicious. So I've been fortunate to that there's just lots of kindness, lots of kind people around, who've heard the trouble that Riley and I were in due to my own poor decision. But nevertheless, everyone has been very kind, either just listening to us or, offering some way to help, which has been very nice. And then the people at the hut earlier today, I didn't even mention to them, what happened or the bad experience that we had, but they were this lady offered some food, and I was just really hungry, so I really enjoyed the sandwich. And okay, I think that's all for now. Riley and I are going to have a good night, and we will check in tomorrow. So hope everyone is doing well. And bye for now.